The notice came to her through the minister's wife, which was how most things came to her in that season. Quietly, sideways, wrapped in concern. She had been living in the back room of the church for 6 weeks by then, earning her keep by teaching the younger children their letters 3 mornings a week and sweeping the nave on Sundays. It was not a life, it was a ledge. The notice read, widower, Wyoming territory, son age 7, need a woman who can manage a household and teach a child. Arrangement discussed upon arrival, right to general delivery, Burnt Fork, Sweetwater County. She read it twice, then she set it on the table beside her supper and ate without looking at it again. In the morning it was still there. She read it a 3rd time. She had been a school teacher in Missouri for 4 years before she married. She had been a wife for 3 years after that, and then a widow for 7 months. And now she was a woman sleeping in a church back room with a trunk, a sewing basket, and the particular stillness of someone who has used up what she had and is trying to determine what comes next. She wrote back that evening. She kept the letter short. She listed what she could do. She did not list what she had lost. The train west took 2 days, then a stage, then a hired wagon driven by a man who said 4 words the entire 40 miles and seemed to consider that adequate. The country opened as they went, wider and flatter than anything she had known. The sky pressing down from above and the land pushing back from below, and between them a wind that moved through the dry grass with a sound like something breathing. The homestead sat at the bottom of a shallow slope, sheltered from the north by a rise of red rock. She saw it first from a 1/4 mile out and looked at it the way she would look at a student she had not yet formed an opinion about, carefully, without deciding. The house was low and square, built from sawn timber and chinked with gray mortar. The roof was iron, newer than the walls, 1 window on the south face, 1 on the east. A covered porch along the front, 1 board warped upward from the moisture. A barn behind it, solid, recently repaired on the near side. 3 horses in the corral. A garden plot along the south wall of the house, bare now in mid-October, but the soil had been turned and the beds were squared and edged. Someone had cared about that garden at some point. The wagon stopped in the yard. She climbed down before the driver offered to help. She lifted her trunk from the bed herself. He handed down her sewing basket. He turned the wagon around and left without asking if she was certain she wanted to be here. She stood in the yard with her trunk beside her. The wind came down off the rocks and moved through the dry grass along the fence line. A dog appeared at the barn door, looked at her, decided she was not interesting, and went back inside. She waited. He came from the barn eventually. Tall, lean, mid-40s or worn younger than that, moving with the particular economy of a man who had stopped wasting effort on anything that wasn't necessary. He wore no coat despite the cold. His shirt was clean. She noted that. His hands, when he stopped in front of her, were scarred along the knuckles, but the nails were cut. He said her name as a question. She said yes. He nodded once. He picked up her trunk without asking and carried it to the porch steps. She followed with her basket. Inside, a main room with a table, 4 chairs, a cook stove with a pipe that went up clean through the ceiling, shelves with provisions that were adequate but not generous, door to a back bedroom closed, a ladder to a loft. He set her trunk down near the stove. She looked at the provisions on the shelf: flour, salt, dried beans, a small crock of lard, cornmeal, 2 tins she didn't recognize from the front. She crossed to them and checked. Peaches. She didn't say anything about the peaches. He said the bedroom in the back was hers. He said he slept in the loft. He said the boy slept in the loft with him. She asked where the boy was now. He said, out back. She asked how old. He said, 7. She said she would go introduce herself. He said, and here he paused in a way that was neither awkward nor rude, simply careful. He said she should know that the boy didn't talk, had not talked in going on 2 years. He wasn't deaf, he understood everything. He just didn't say words. The man said this without apology and without particular sorrow, the way a person states a fact that has become simply part of the weather. She said she understood. She went out the back door. The boy was at the fence at the far end of the yard, watching the horses in the corral. He was small for 7s, or perhaps just thin, wearing a coat a size too large that hit below his knees. Dark hair, needed cutting. When she came up beside him, he didn't move, didn't startle, just turned his head and looked at her with gray eyes that were steady and measuring. She said hello. She said she'd be staying for a while, helping around the house. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the horses. She stood beside him and watched the horses too. The largest one, a bay with a white marking on its nose, moved along the fence line and pressed its head over the rail toward the boy. The boy reached up and touched its nose without reaching for it, waited for the horse to come to him. She noticed that. After a while, she said the bay was a good-looking horse. The boy didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. She went back inside to start supper. The first week she spent learning the homestead the way she had always learned a new classroom, by watching what was already working before she touched anything. The man kept a tight schedule. Barn before dawn, back for breakfast, out again by full light, in at noon, out again back by dusk. He did not make conversation for the sake of it. He answered questions with as many words as the question required, and no more. She found she did not mind this. The boy followed his father most of the day. In the evenings, he sat at the table and looked at a torn almanac that had lost its cover. She asked once if he could read it. He looked at her. She took the almanac and opened it to a page with a diagram of weather patterns. She put her finger under a line of text and read it aloud, then looked at him. He watched her mouth. She read another line. He looked at the page. She came back with her own book the next evening, one she had carried since her teaching days, simple readers with short paragraphs. She set it beside the almanac. She didn't make it a lesson. She just read aloud from it while she mended a shirt from the basket by the stove, and the boy sat across the table, and after a while his eyes moved from her to the page. The man watched this from his chair without appearing to watch it. She could see him from the corner of her eye. He had a quality of stillness that was not indifference. She had known indifferent men. This was not the same thing. At the end of the first week, she took stock of the kitchen stores properly. She wrote a list. She set it on the table after supper and asked when he next went to Burnt Fork. He said, Saturday. She said she'd come with him. He said it was a hard ride, cold. She said she had ridden in cold before. He looked at the list. She had written 12 items in a column with her school teacher's hand, neat and vertical. He read it through without touching it. He said the account at the general store was carrying a balance. She asked how much. He told her. She looked at the list and crossed off 4 items with the pencil from her apron pocket, pushed it back across the table. He looked at what remained. He said nothing. He folded the list once and put it in his shirt pocket. Saturday they rode to Burnt Fork. The boy came too, sitting in front of her on the horse with his back against her chest, neither tense nor relaxed, simply there. Town was small and still building itself. A grain elevator, a livery, a saloon, a post office attached to the hardware, and a general store at the corner with a covered porch. The woman behind the counter was tall and angular, with the particular precision of someone who had decided long ago that being right was more useful than being liked. Her name was Mrs. Langford, and she looked at the list without looking at her first, then looked at her. She said, his account is carrying 3 months. She said she knew. She asked what the list would come to. Mrs. Langford told her. She did the arithmetic in her head. It was within what remained. She said they'd take everything on the list. Mrs. Langford looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then she began pulling items from the shelves. On the way back, she noticed a man standing outside the land office, watching them as they passed. Not the ordinary watching of a small town, something with more attention behind it. He was city-dressed for this country, a good coat and clean boots, and he was writing something in a small notebook. She filed this away and said nothing. November came down hard off the mountains. The first snow arrived in the 3rd week. Not a dusting, but a real fall. 6 inches overnight and more behind it. The man spent 2 days reinforcing the barn roof on the south side where it had begun to give. She made 3 batches of bread and taught the boy to time the rise by watching the dough, not the clock. He stood on a stool at the counter and pressed his fist into the risen dough and watched it spring back. He did this 4 times in a row. each time with the focused repetition of a child testing a principle. She told him that was exactly how to check it. He looked at her. Then he pressed his fist into it one more time. She looked away so he wouldn't see her smile. The winter settled in. The rhythm of the homestead became familiar to her. The sounds of it, the cold in the mornings before the stove caught, the particular quality of light through the south window on clear days, white and clean. The man fixed the broken porch step without being asked. She restretched the canvas on the window frame in her room where the cold came through. Neither of them mentioned what the other had done. She began reading aloud to the boy in the evenings from whatever she had. The reader, the almanac, a Bible from the upper shelf, a single issue of a newspaper from August that he found in the barn and brought to her without explanation. She read the newspaper thoroughly, including the legal notices in the back column. One item caught her eye. A notice about filed mineral surveys in Sweetwater County, several township ranges listed, the survey company named as Merritt & Associates out of Denver. She tore that column out and folded it into the back of her reader. The following Thursday, a man came to the homestead, the same one she had seen outside the land office in Burnt Fork. He knocked at the door while the man was in the barn, and she answered it. He introduced himself as a land agent representing a development interest in Denver. He said he was making offers on homestead claims in the area, cash, fair market. She said the man of the house was in the barn. She said to wait on the porch. She went to the barn. She told him there was a man on the porch with a cash offer for the claim. She said it plain, with no expression. He came inside, wiped his hands, went to the porch. She stood back from the doorway where she could hear. The agent said things were getting harder out here, that the winters would only get worse, that the market for sheep and cattle was soft and likely to stay soft, that the cash figure he was offering was a fair one, more than the property would pull in another 5 years of working it. He listened. She could hear the quality of his silence even from inside. He said he would think on it. The agent said not to think too long, said there were other claims in the area and his buyers had limited patience. He said he understood. The agent left. She waited until the sound of hooves had gone. He came back inside and stood near the stove without taking off his coat. He looked at the floor. She asked how long he had been on the claim. He said 11 years. His wife's father had filed it. She had grown up on this ground. She asked if anyone had offered before. He said no. She asked if he knew what was under the eastern quarter. He looked up. She went to her reader and took out the folded newspaper column. She put it on the table and smoothed it flat. She pointed to the survey notice. She told him the township range listed covered this area. She told him Merritt & Associates was a mineral survey firm, not a land company. She told him a development interest in Denver, hiring a land agent to buy up homestead claims in a county where a mineral survey had just been filed, was not a company that wanted the land for farming. He read the column. He read it again. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. She asked if he had the original claim papers. He said he had them in the barn in the strongbox. She said she'd like to see them. He brought them in. She sat at the table and read through them carefully. She had read enough county clerk documents in her father's office. He had been a township clerk in Missouri for 20 years, that she knew the language. The claim was valid. The boundaries were clear. There was a mineral rights clause that had not been separated, which meant whoever owned the surface owned what was underneath. She said the claim was solid. She said he had not done anything to forfeit it. He said he had known that. She said she knew he had known it. She said what he may not have known was what the land agent hadn't told him, that the standard cash offer for claims in areas with mineral surveys ran 30% below actual value, that the offer he'd been given today was likely less than half what the eastern quarter alone was worth if the survey bore out. He was quiet for a long time. He said he had been thinking of taking it. Not for the money, but because he had been looking at this homestead for 11 years, thinking about whether it would ever become what she believed it could. His wife. He said the word the way a man says a name he still reaches for sometimes out of habit. He said she had believed in this land. He had believed in it for her sake more than his own, and now he wasn't certain whose belief was holding it together. She looked at the claim papers on the table. She said she thought the land was worth holding regardless of who was doing the believing. She said if the mineral survey came to anything, he would have something to give the boy. If it came to nothing, he would still have the land. He looked at the papers too. He said he would need someone to write a formal response declining the offer. Worded right. She said she could write it. He said he didn't know she could do that kind of writing. She said there were things they didn't yet know about each other. She said that was still changing. She wrote the letter that evening at the table while he sat across from her reading the almanac. The boy was in the loft. Outside, the wind came off the rocks in long, slow passes. She wrote in the formal language her father had used, citing the claim number and survey date and the applicable statutes she could remember. She was not certain she had every citation exactly right, but the language was close enough to be taken seriously, which was the first requirement. She read it back to him. He said it sounded right. She said she could mail it in Burnt Fork on Saturday. He said they would go. February was the worst of the winter. 3 days of wind that found every gap in the structure and made the house sound as though it was considering its options. The horses were brought in. The feed ran shorter than she had anticipated, and she recalculated the portions carefully, stretching what was there without cutting it so far the animals suffered. She did this without telling him because there was nothing useful in telling him. There was only what could be done, and she was doing it. On the 4th day, the wind stopped. The silence was louder than the storm. The boy came downstairs in the morning and stood at the window. He stood there for a long time, looking at the white yard. The snow drifted against the barn door, the fence posts capped in white. She was at the stove. She glanced at him and looked away, not wanting to interrupt whatever he was working on internally. He said very quietly it stopped. She did not turn around. She kept her hand on the coffee pot. She breathed once, careful and even. Yes, a few hours ago. He did not say anything else. He went to the table and sat down. She brought him his breakfast and set it in front of him and sat across from him and ate her own without making anything of the moment, because making something of it would have been the wrong thing to do. When the man came down from the loft, she watched the side of his face when he saw the boy eating quietly, the same as any morning. He stopped at the base of the ladder. Something passed through his expression that she could not fully read, but she recognized the shape of it. She looked back at her plate. He sat down, she poured his coffee, they ate. Outside, the snow glittered in the first sun they'd had in 4 days. Spring came in the way it does in Wyoming. Not all at once, but in signals, small concessions the winter made before finally releasing its hold. The upper pasture softened. The horses stayed out overnight without complaint. Along the south fence line, the first green appeared in the places the snow had melted earliest, tentative and thin. She turned the garden beds herself, working in the early morning before the sun was full. The soil was good. She had suspected it would be, had been watching the drainage all winter, the way water moved across the yard after the small thaws. She planted according to what the almanac said for this elevation, and what she knew from her mother's garden in Missouri, adjusted for the shorter season. The boy watched from the fence. She showed him how deep the seeds went for each variety, and he pressed them in with his thumb, one at a time, steadying them against the soil. The formal response to the land agent had gone unanswered. She took that as a good sign. A company that intended to push would have pushed already. In April, a man from the county assessor's office came out to review the claim boundaries. She brought him coffee on the porch, and he thanked her and said the claim was in good standing. He mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been several buyers lately who had moved on when the claims proved tight. She thanked him and went back inside and said nothing about it. Mrs. Langford stopped her on the road near the end of April. She said the homestead was looking well. She said she had heard, and here she paused in the manner of someone who is both reporting news and testing for a reaction. She had heard from the county assessor that the eastern quarter of the claim had shown favorable returns on the preliminary mineral study. She said it as a statement. Her eyes said more. She said she had heard something similar. Mrs. Langford looked at her for a moment. Then she said she had not expected him to last out here after everything. She said it without cruelty, simply. She said she thought sometimes people just needed the right winter. Mrs. Langford nodded slowly, and something in her face shifted the way faces shift when they have decided to revise an earlier opinion. She said she'd put the account back on regular terms if that suited. She said it suited fine. She walked back in the long afternoon light, the road dry now and pale, the grass along its edges green for the first time. When she came over the last rise, the homestead was below her, the barn door open, smoke from the chimney slow and unhurried. The garden beds along the south wall showing rows of green that had not been there a week ago. He was at the corral fence. The boy was beside him. She watched them from the rise for a moment. The man's hand on the boy's shoulder, both of them looking at the horses. The boy saying something she couldn't hear from this distance, the man bending slightly toward him to listen. She started down the slope. He turned when he heard her on the road and watched her come. She kept her pace the same. When she was close enough, the boy looked up at her with his gray eyes and said, without being prompted, that the bay had been limping this morning, but was better now. She said that was good to know. She asked if his father had looked at the hoof. He said yes. She said good. She went inside and hung her coat and started supper. And through the window she watched the two of them still at the fence, the boy talking in the particular slow, exploratory way of a child, who is rediscovering that words can carry the weight of a thing, the man listening. Later, over supper, he said, without preface, in the middle of passing the bread, that he had not written the notice expecting much. She said she knew. He said he had written it the way a man writes something when he has tried everything he knows to try and has run out of what he knew. She said she had answered it the same way. He looked at his plate. Outside the evening was coming on slowly, the way spring evenings do, reluctant to give way to dark. He said she had given the boy back, something he had stopped believing was still there. She said the boy had done that himself, she had only made space for it. Exact. He said there was a difference between knowing someone is capable of a thing and creating the conditions where they can show it. She looked up at him. He was not a man who spoke in long sentences. This was among the longer things she had heard him say, and he had said it directly, watching her, not looking for a way out of the statement. She recognized the effort that required, because she knew something about what it costs to say clearly what you meant after a long time of not saying it. She said she was not leaving in the fall. He had not asked. She said it anyway because it was true and it was better said than held. He was quiet for a moment. He reached for his coffee. He set it back down without drinking it. He said he was glad. The boy was asleep by then, upstairs in the loft. The dishes were done. The lamp burned low between them. Outside, the wind moved through the new grass along the fence line, and the horses were still in the corral. And somewhere to the south, a night bird called once and was quiet. She folded her hands on the table. He folded his. There was nothing that required saying. They sat in the easy silence of people who have already done the hard work and know it. And the lamp held its flame without wavering. And the dark outside was the good kind of dark. The kind that means the day was real and is now finished, and tomorrow will be another one.